What if I told you that the woman quietly mopping floors at one of America's most secure defense facilities could field strip and reassemble an M4 rifle in 12 seconds flat, but the security guards mocked her because she was just the cleaning lady? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The autumn rain drummed against the reinforced glass windows of Atlas Defense Corporation's 37th floor as Diana Sullivan pushed her cleaning cart down the polished marble corridors at 11:47 p.m. The building's lobby bore the weight of corporate authority: polished steel, imported granite, and floor-to-ceiling displays showcasing the company's military contracts worth over $2.8 billion annually. Atlas wasn't just another defense contractor. They were the primary supplier of advanced tactical equipment to special operations forces across 3 continents. But none of that impressed Diana anymore. At 42, she had long since learned that impressive facades often concealed uncomfortable truths. Her weathered hands gripped the mop handle with the same steady precision that had once held an M16 during her 12 years as a combat engineer in the Army. That life felt like a distant memory now, buried under medical bills, disability claims that never seemed to process, and the grinding reality of working 3 jobs to keep her head above water. The night shift at Atlas paid $16.50 an hour, which was exactly $3.50 more than the grocery store where she stocked shelves from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m., and $2.25 more than the diner where she waited tables on weekends. Math she had memorized, not by choice, but by necessity. Her small apartment in Phoenix's Roosevelt district cost $1,400 a month, and after utilities, her beat-up Honda Civic's payments, and the prescriptions for the back injury that had ended her military career, she had roughly $340 left each month for food, gas, and everything else life demanded. Atlas Defense Corporation occupied floors 35 through 42 of the Pinnacle Tower, and their security requirements were unlike anything else in the building. The company held contracts with the Pentagon, CIA, and various classified agencies that Diana's security clearance, suspended due to her civilian status, no longer allowed her to know about. What she did know was that the building housed everything from prototype weapon systems to classified communications equipment, all protected by what management proudly called military-grade security protocols. The irony wasn't lost on her. Military-grade security managed by people who had never spent a day in the military. Head of Security Gerald Hoffman embodied everything Diana had learned to recognize and quietly despise about corporate authority. At 55, Hoffman carried himself with the swagger of someone who had watched too many action movies and confused confidence with competence. His security background consisted of 8 years as a mall cop and a 2-week certification course in executive protection services that he mentioned in every conversation. The certificate hung in his office next to a motivational poster featuring a soaring eagle and the words, "Leadership, because someone has to take charge." Hoffman's security team reflected his hiring philosophy: young men who looked the part but had never been tested by anything more challenging than a shoplifter or a drunk wedding guest. They wore tactical gear purchased from the same suppliers that equipped actual special forces units, carried weapons they had trained with for a total of 40 hours, and spoke in military jargon they had learned from video games and YouTube videos. Diana observed all of this during her 6 months of night shifts, moving through their world like a ghost. She had learned to become invisible in corporate spaces, eyes down, earbuds in, never engaging unless necessarily. The security guards saw her as part of the building's infrastructure, no more noteworthy than the elevator or the air conditioning system. Occasionally, one of them would make a crude joke as she cleaned around their station, or complain about her work interrupting their important conversations about sports and dating apps. But Diana saw everything. She noticed that the motion sensors on the 38th floor had blind spots near the emergency exits. She observed that the security cameras in the northwest stairwell had been malfunctioning for 3 weeks, their red recording lights dark between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. She watched Hoffman's team conduct their patrols, routine walks that followed the same predictable pattern every night, timed perfectly for anyone who cared to observe.
Most concerning to Diana was what she recognized as a fundamental misunderstanding of actual security. The guards focused on impressive technology and rigid procedures, while missing basic vulnerabilities that any soldier with combat experience would spot immediately. Their weapons storage protocols violated half a dozen military standards. Their communication systems relied on consumer-grade equipment that could be jammed with devices available on Amazon. Their response procedures assumed threats would announce themselves politely and wait for backup to arrive. Diana had tried, once, to mention her concerns. 3 months earlier, she had approached Alex Chen, the youngest and seemingly most reasonable member of Hoffman's team. Chen was 24, fresh out of community college with a degree in criminal justice, and still retained enough humility to occasionally listen to people he considered beneath his position. "Excuse me," Diana had said quietly as Chen sat at the security desk, scrolling through social media on his phone. "I noticed the camera in Stairwell C has been offline for a few days. Just thought you should know." Chen had looked up with mild annoyance. "Thanks, but we've got everything under control. Maintenance handles all that technical stuff. It's just that the emergency exit in that area doesn't have any other coverage, so if someone—" "Look, no offense, but security is kind of our job, you know? I'm sure you're just trying to help, but we've got protocols for this stuff." Diana had nodded and returned to her work, filing the interaction away as confirmation of what she already knew. These people were playing dress-up in a world where real threats required real expertise. The building's true vulnerability became clear to Diana during her 4th month on the job, when she gained access to areas that even impressed her. Atlas Defense's Classified Research Division occupied the 40th floor, behind security doors that required both keycards and biometric scans. Diana's cleaning clearance, ironically, granted her more access to sensitive areas than most of the company's own employees possessed. The logic was simple. Someone had to clean the spaces where defense contractors developed weapon systems, and the background check for cleaning personnel was often more thorough than the check for mid-level executives. What Diana found behind those security doors reminded her why she had once believed in her country's military superiority, and why she now worried about its future. Atlas Defense was developing next-generation tactical equipment, modular weapon systems, advanced communication devices, and prototype armor that could genuinely save soldiers' lives in combat zones she remembered all too well. The technology was impressive, innovative, and absolutely critical to military operations that most Americans would never hear about. It was also protected by security measures that Diana recognized as fundamentally inadequate. The realization had kept her awake during her few precious hours of sleep. Somewhere in Syria, Afghanistan, or locations that didn't officially exist, soldiers were depending on equipment developed in laboratories protected by mall cops with tactical fantasies. The disconnect was more than troubling. It was potentially catastrophic. Diana's concerns intensified when she began noticing irregularities in the building's overnight activity. Atlas Defense Corporation operated on government contracts that officially shut down at 6 p.m., but Diana's cleaning schedule had revealed a different reality. Certain floors remained active well into the night, with personnel she didn't recognize accessing areas that should have been empty. Vehicles arrived at the building's service entrance without appearing on the visitor logs. Phone conversations in languages she recognized from her deployment years carried through ventilation systems during the supposed quiet hours. By October, Diana had documented 17 separate security violations in her personal notebook, a habit from her military days that she couldn't shake. None of them individually represented a crisis, but collectively they painted a picture of an organization that prioritized appearance over substance, compliance over competence. The night everything changed began like any other. Diana arrived at Pinnacle Tower at 11:30 p.m., signed in with the drowsy lobby guard, and took the service elevator to the 35th floor. Hoffman's team was conducting their standard evening briefing, a 10-minute gathering where they discussed the previous day's non-events and divided up the night's patrol routes. But as Diana began her cleaning routine in the administrative areas, she noticed something that made her military-trained instincts surge to attention. The building's overnight activity wasn't just irregular, it was following patterns she recognized from her combat engineering training, patterns that suggested reconnaissance, preparation, and the kind of methodical observation that preceded coordinated attacks. Someone was watching Atlas Defense Corporation with professional interest, and the people responsible for protecting it were too busy playing security guard to notice they were being hunted.
Diana Sullivan's alarm clock buzzed at 5:15 a.m., the same time it had every morning for the past 6 months. Her studio apartment in the Roosevelt district was sparse but meticulously organized, a habit ingrained during 12 years of military service that civilian life hadn't managed to break. The walls were bare except for a single framed photograph, her combat engineering unit posed in front of a forward operating base in Afghanistan, their faces young and confident under desert camouflage. She was the only woman in that photograph, and at the time, she had been proud of that distinction. Staff Sergeant Diana Sullivan, 524th Engineer Battalion, specialized in explosive ordnance disposal and tactical infrastructure. Her job had been to find, disarm, and dispose of the improvised explosive devices that killed more American soldiers than bullets ever did. For 12 years, she had been very, very good at that job. The back injury that ended her career happened during her third deployment when a poorly planned convoy route led her team into an ambush outside Kandahar. The IED that flipped their Humvee had been sophisticated, professionally constructed with military-grade explosives and a triggering mechanism that suggested formal training. Diana had managed to extract 2 wounded soldiers from the wreckage before the second explosion sent shrapnel through her lower spine, ending both the rescue and her military career in a single moment of white-hot pain. The Army had been efficient in its bureaucracy. Medical discharge, disability rating of 60%, thank you for your service, here's your paperwork. The VA hospital had been less efficient. 2 years of physical therapy, medications that helped some days and did nothing on others, and a disability check that covered roughly half of what civilian life actually cost. The transition counselor had been optimistic. Your technical skills and security clearance should make you very attractive to defense contractors. What the counselor hadn't mentioned was that should and would were different words for important reasons. Diana's first interview after leaving the Army had been with Raytheon. The hiring manager, a soft-spoken man in his 50s who had never worn a uniform, had been impressed by her technical expertise and combat experience, right up until he learned about her disability rating and the medications she took for chronic pain. Suddenly, her 12 years of handling explosives under enemy fire became a liability. Insurance concerns, he had explained apologetically. You understand. She understood perfectly. Corporate America wanted the skills that military service provided, but not the people who had paid the price to acquire them. The interviews that followed had been variations on the same theme. Lockheed Martin was concerned about her reliability, given her medical history. Boeing questioned whether her confrontational military background would fit their collaborative culture, a polite way of saying they found her direct communication style uncomfortable. General Dynamics had been interested until the background check revealed her disability claim, at which point they discovered she wasn't quite the cultural fit they were seeking. After 8 months of rejections, Diana's savings had evaporated and her options had narrowed to jobs that didn't require her to explain why she sometimes walked with a slight limp or why she occasionally needed to sit down when her back seized up. The grocery store had hired her immediately, minimum wage, no questions asked, flexible scheduling for someone juggling multiple jobs. The diner followed shortly after, and finally Atlas Defense Corporation's night cleaning position. The irony was bitter and constant. During the day, she stocked shelves with products she could barely afford. During the evening, she served food to customers who treated her like part of the furniture. During the night, she cleaned offices for a company that developed the same type of tactical equipment she had once used to save soldiers' lives. And throughout it all, she remained invisible to the people who could have benefited most from her expertise. Diana's military training hadn't just been about explosives and engineering. The Army had taught her to observe, analyze, and anticipate threats with a thoroughness that civilian life rarely demanded. Walking through Atlas defense corridors at night, she couldn't help but conduct the same security assessments that had kept her alive in Afghanistan. The habits were automatic, ingrained through years of combat where inattention meant death. What she observed troubled her more each night. Atlas Defense's security protocols looked impressive on paper and sounded professional during Hoffman's briefings, but they reflected a fundamental misunderstanding of how real threats operated. The company's approach to security was reactive rather than preventative, focused on responding to incidents rather than preventing them. In a combat zone, that approach got people killed. Diana had tried to suppress her military instincts, to accept her role as just the cleaning lady, and focus on the paycheck she desperately needed. But 12 years of training couldn't be turned off like a switch, especially when she recognized patterns that suggested serious danger. The first pattern had been subtle. Vehicles parked on the street outside the building during hours when the area should have been empty. Not the same vehicle, never in the same spot twice, but always positioned with clear sight lines to the building's entrances and exits. Diana had learned to recognize surveillance in places where spotting it first meant the difference between completing a mission and coming home in a flag-draped box. The second pattern involved the building's service areas. Someone had been testing access points, trying doors that should have been locked, probing the loading dock's security, mapping the areas where cameras didn't quite reach. The attempts were professional, methodical, and designed to look like random vagrant activity to anyone not trained to recognize the difference. The third pattern was the most concerning. Diana had begun noticing people in the building who didn't belong, individuals who carried themselves with military bearing but appeared on no visitor logs, who knew how to move through secure areas without attracting attention, who spoke in the shorthand that came from professional training. They weren't tourists or lost executives, they were operators, and they were gathering intelligence. Diana's notebook, a weathered field journal she had carried through 3 deployments, now contained detailed observations about each pattern, times, locations, descriptions, and behavioral analysis written in the same careful shorthand she had once used to document IED placement patterns and enemy movement. The information would have been invaluable to anyone responsible for the building's security if anyone had been willing to listen to a disabled veteran working as a cleaning lady. Her attempts to share her concerns had been met with polite dismissal at best, open mockery at worst. Chen, the youngest security guard, had at least listened before explaining that she was probably misunderstanding normal business activity. The others hadn't bothered with politeness. When Diana had mentioned her observations about the surveillance vehicles to another guard, he had laughed openly. "Lady, you watch too many spy movies. This is Phoenix, not Baghdad. Nobody's planning some big mission against an office building." Diana hadn't bothered to explain that she had never watched spy movies or that her knowledge of surveillance techniques came from identifying them before they killed her and her soldiers. The guard's dismissal told her everything she needed to know about how seriously her concerns would be taken. But Diana's military training had taught her something else. When you recognized a threat that others couldn't see, your responsibility didn't end with reporting it. Sometimes you had to prepare for the moment when denial became crisis, and competence became the only thing standing between success and catastrophe. Late at night, alone in the building's secure areas, Diana began conducting her own security assessments. She mapped the building's vulnerabilities, identified potential breach points, and developed response scenarios based on the threat patterns she had observed.
She noted which weapons storage areas were inadequately secured, which communication systems were vulnerable to jamming, and which escape routes would become death traps if someone with professional training decided to exploit them. Most importantly, she began preparing for the possibility that her fears were justified. Diana's personal belongings included items that most cleaning ladies didn't carry: a tactical flashlight that could serve as a weapon, a multi-tool with capabilities beyond opening boxes, and a situational awareness that never fully relaxed, even in apparently safe environments. The photograph on her apartment wall served as a daily reminder of who she had been before civilian life had reduced her to invisibility. Staff Sergeant Diana Sullivan, combat engineer, soldier. The woman in that photograph had been trusted with responsibilities that affected national security, had made decisions that saved lives, and had earned the respect of men who measured competence in life and death terms. That woman was still alive, still capable, still ready to serve when the moment demanded it. The people at Atlas Defense Corporation saw only the cleaning lady with the slight limp and the quiet demeanor. They had no idea that their dismissal had placed them under the protection of someone far more qualified to keep them safe than anyone on their official payroll. Soon, they would learn the difference between credentials and capability, and by then, their survival might depend on the combat veteran they had been too blind to recognize.
Gerald Hoffman's office on the 36th floor of Atlas Defense Corporation served as a monument to his inflated sense of importance. The walls displayed a collection of certificates from weekend security seminars, photographs of himself with minor local politicians, and a glass case containing tactical equipment he had purchased but never used in any real situation. The centerpiece was his mahogany desk, positioned to face the door so that visitors would be forced to acknowledge his authority from the moment they entered. At 55, Hoffman had spent the last 8 years crafting an image of himself as a security expert, despite never having faced a genuine threat more serious than a drunk wedding guest or a shoplifter with an attitude. His path to his current position had been paved with networking, exaggeration, and the kind of confident incompetence that somehow impressed corporate executives who knew even less about security than he did. Hoffman's background, when examined closely, revealed the thin foundation underlying his authority. After high school, he had worked for 6 years as a security guard at Westfield Shopping Center, where his primary responsibilities involved checking for unlocked stores after closing and occasionally asking teenagers to move along. He had parlayed that experience into a job with a small private investigation firm, where he spent 2 years taking photographs of cheating spouses and serving subpoenas. The PI work had led to a position with a corporate security consulting company, where Hoffman had learned to speak the language of threat assessment while never actually assessing any real threats. His hiring at Atlas Defense Corporation had been the result of perfect timing rather than exceptional qualifications. The previous head of security had been terminated after a workplace harassment scandal, and the company needed someone who could start immediately and present well during client visits. Hoffman's resume had been polished, his references had been enthusiastic, and his interview had been conducted by executives who measured security competence by confidence rather than capability. Once hired, Hoffman had immediately set about building a security department that reflected his priorities: appearance over substance, process over performance, and loyalty over competence. He surrounded himself with young men who shared his enthusiasm for tactical equipment and military jargon, but who had even less real-world experience than he possessed. The security team Hoffman assembled was a carefully curated collection of individuals who would never threaten his position or question his decisions. Tyler Brooks, 26, had been a part-time bouncer at a nightclub before joining Atlas Defense Corporation. His primary qualifications were an imposing physical presence and an uncritical acceptance of Hoffman's authority. Jake Morrison, 24, had completed 2 years of community college before dropping out to pursue what he called tactical studies, a self-directed program of YouTube videos and airsoft competitions. Danny Walsh, 25, had served 6 months in the Army Reserve before being discharged for disciplinary issues that Hoffman had never bothered to investigate. The youngest member of the team, Alex Chen, represented Hoffman's attempt to add academic credibility to his department. Chen had recently graduated from community college with an associate degree in criminal justice, and his textbook knowledge of security principles occasionally made him question some of the team's procedures. However, his youth and inexperience made him easy to dismiss when his questions became inconvenient. Hoffman's management style reflected his fundamental insecurity about his own qualifications. He compensated for his lack of real expertise by demanding absolute deference to his authority and creating elaborate procedures that made simple tasks appear complex and important. Security briefings that should have taken 5 minutes stretched to half an hour as Hoffman explained protocols that had never been tested in actual situations. Equipment that should have been readily accessible was locked behind multiple authorization levels that existed primarily to demonstrate Hoffman's control over his department. The daily routine at Atlas Defense Corporation's security station revealed the gap between Hoffman's image and reality. Each shift began with a briefing, where Hoffman would review the previous day's incidents, typically minor events like delivery trucks arriving at the wrong entrance or employees forgetting their access cards. These mundane occurrences were discussed with the gravity typically reserved for terrorist threats, complete with tactical terminology that Hoffman had memorized from security industry publications.
The security team's patrol procedures were elaborate but ineffective. Hoffman had designed routes that covered maximum territory in minimum time, prioritizing the appearance of thorough coverage over actual security assessment. The guards walked predetermined paths at scheduled intervals, checking boxes on clipboards without actually observing their environment for signs of unusual activity. Their radios crackled with important-sounding communications about normal building operations, creating an atmosphere of constant vigilance that masked complete inattention to actual security concerns. Hoffman's relationship with the building's other personnel reflected his need to establish hierarchical dominance over anyone he perceived as beneath his position. He treated maintenance workers with barely concealed contempt, viewing them as potential security risks rather than valuable sources of information about building operations. Cleaning staff were practically invisible to him except when their work interfered with his departmental activities, at which point he would issue condescending reminders about staying out of secure areas and respecting security protocols. Diana Sullivan represented everything Hoffman found threatening about people who didn't fit neatly into his organizational structure. Her quiet competence made him uncomfortable in ways he couldn't articulate. Her military bearing, even subdued by civilian circumstances, reminded him of authority he had never possessed. Most dangerously, her occasional questions about security procedures suggested a level of expertise that he recognized but couldn't acknowledge without undermining his own position. Hoffman's few interactions with Diana had been calculated to establish his dominance while maintaining plausible professionalism. When she had approached Chen about the malfunctioning camera, Hoffman had made sure to intercede with a dismissive explanation about how security professionals handle these matters. When she had mentioned concerns about surveillance vehicles, he had publicly ridiculed her observations while privately making note of her troubling tendency to interfere with security operations. The truth was that Diana's presence in the building made Hoffman deeply uncomfortable, though he lacked the self-awareness to understand why. Her quiet confidence suggested capabilities he didn't possess, knowledge he hadn't acquired, and experience he could never claim. Rather than recognize her potential value to his department, Hoffman's insecurity transformed her into a threat that needed to be diminished and controlled. Hoffman's approach to managing this perceived threat revealed his fundamental character flaws. Instead of investigating Diana's concerns or exploring her background, he focused on discrediting her observations and limiting her access to information that might further highlight his incompetence. He instructed his team to treat her questions as nuisances rather than potentially valuable intelligence. He made subtle changes to cleaning schedules that reduced her exposure to security operations. Most importantly, he created an atmosphere where listening to Diana's concerns would be seen as disloyalty to his leadership. The corporate culture at Atlas Defense Corporation supported Hoffman's approach through benign neglect rather than active endorsement. The executives who had hired him were satisfied with his ability to present security briefings that sounded professional and maintain a department that looked competent during client visits. The company's actual security needs were theoretical rather than practical. They faced no obvious threats, operated in a safe location, and dealt with clients who were more interested in impressive presentations than rigorous protection protocols. This institutional indifference to genuine security created an environment where Hoffman's incompetence could flourish without consequence. His elaborate procedures were never tested against real threats. His equipment purchases were judged by their cost and appearance rather than their effectiveness. His personnel decisions were evaluated based on team loyalty and corporate compatibility rather than actual capability. The result was a security department that functioned perfectly for a company that faced no real security challenges but would be catastrophically inadequate if genuine threats materialized. Hoffman had built a system designed to handle the problems he understood, while remaining blind to dangers that required expertise he didn't possess. Diana Sullivan's presence in this environment represented a fundamental challenge to everything Hoffman had constructed. Her military experience, her observational skills, and her growing awareness of actual security vulnerabilities threatened to expose the gap between his department's image and its reality. Rather than embrace this expertise as an asset, Hoffman's personality and insecurity guaranteed that he would treat it as an enemy to be defeated rather than a resource to be utilized. The stage was set for a confrontation between competence and authority, between genuine expertise and institutional power, between someone who had been tested in life and death situations and someone whose entire career had been built on avoiding such tests. When that confrontation came, the consequences would extend far beyond personal pride or professional positioning. Lives would depend on which approach to security would prove more effective: Hoffman's impressive procedures and expensive equipment, or Diana's hard-earned knowledge of how real threats operated in the real world.
November 15th began like every other Tuesday night at Atlas Defense Corporation. Diana arrived at 11:30 p.m. to find the lobby security guard, Walter Kimes, half asleep behind his desk with a crossword puzzle spread across his keyboard. The elevator carried her to the 35th floor, where she began her routine: emptying waste baskets, vacuuming conference rooms, and sanitizing surfaces that would be cluttered again within hours of the building reopening. But tonight felt different from the moment Diana stepped off the elevator. The building's atmosphere carried a tension she recognized from combat zones, this subtle electricity that preceded coordinated action. Her military-trained senses, honed by 12 years of detecting threats that could kill her and her soldiers, immediately went on alert. The first sign came at 12:15 a.m. Diana was cleaning the executive conference room on the 37th floor when she noticed unusual activity in the parking garage visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows. 3 vehicles had arrived within minutes of each other: a white panel van, a dark sedan, and a pickup truck with tinted windows. None of them appeared on the building directory's visitor list that she had learned to check during first security assessments. More concerning, they had parked in positions that provided clear sight lines to all the building's exits while remaining outside the range of most security cameras. Diana's notebook emerged from her cleaning cart as she documented the vehicle's positions, license plates, and the movement patterns of the individuals who emerged from them. 6 men, all moving with the disciplined coordination that came from professional training. They carried themselves like soldiers, alert, purposeful, communicating through subtle gestures rather than voices that could be overheard. At 12:43 a.m., Diana observed the second phase of what she now recognized as a coordinated operation. 2 of the men approached the building's service entrance, the same door that Diana used each night to bring in her cleaning supplies. They weren't trying to break in. Instead, they were conducting what the Army had taught her to recognize as a final reconnaissance, testing response times and confirming intelligence they had gathered during previous surveillance. Diana's radio crackled to life as she watched the men probe the service entrance. Gerald Hoffman's voice filled the empty corridor with his usual combination of authority and incompetence. All security personnel, this is command. We have a report of suspicious activity in the parking garage. Brooks and Morrison, conduct a routine patrol and report back. Walsh, monitor the cameras from the security station. Chen, maintain your position on the 38th floor. Diana's military experience translated Hoffman's confident instructions into their actual meaning. 4 guards with minimal training were about to walk into a situation they weren't qualified to handle, using procedures that had never been tested against real threats. If her assessment was correct, they were about to encounter professionals who had been planning this operation for weeks or months. She moved quickly to a vantage point where she could observe both the security team's response and the activities of the unknown individuals. What she saw confirmed her worst fears about Atlas Defense Corporation's vulnerability. Tyler Brooks and Jake Morrison emerged from the building's main entrance with the swagger of men who had never faced genuine danger. They walked directly toward the suspicious vehicles, their tactical flashlights announcing their presence, while their radios broadcast their locations for anyone with basic electronic surveillance equipment to monitor. They approached the situation with all the subtlety of a high school marching band. The men near the vehicles melted away into the shadows with professional efficiency, leaving behind empty cars and no evidence of their activities. Brooks and Morrison conducted what they would later describe as a thorough security sweep, a 5-minute walk around the parking area that missed the concealed observation posts, the electronic surveillance equipment, and the signs of professional reconnaissance that would have been obvious to anyone with combat experience. "Command, this is Brooks." Tyler's voice carried clearly through Diana's radio. "Parking area is secure. No signs of suspicious activity. Probably just some teenagers causing trouble." Diana watched from the 37th floor as the real suspicious activity continued in areas that Brooks and Morrison hadn't bothered to check. The men who had disappeared during the security sweep had regrouped in positions that provided them with complete visual coverage of the building while remaining invisible to the guards who were supposed to be protecting it.
At 1:15 a.m., Diana's assessment of the situation shifted from concern to alarm. The surveillance team wasn't just gathering intelligence, they were preparing for immediate action. Vehicle positions had changed to provide escape routes. Personnel had moved to positions that would allow them to control the building's access points. Most ominously, Diana recognized the final preparations that preceded assault operations. Her military training demanded immediate action, but her civilian position left her with limited options. She could try to contact Hoffman's security team, but their response to the parking garage situation had demonstrated their complete inability to recognize genuine threats. She could call the Phoenix Police Department, but explaining her concerns would require revealing observational capabilities that would raise questions she wasn't prepared to answer. Diana's decision was made for her at 1:22 a.m., when the building's power grid experienced what would later be described as a routine maintenance interruption. The lights flickered once, twice, then settled into the dim emergency lighting that was supposed to maintain basic visibility during electrical problems. To most people in the building, the power fluctuation would seem like a minor inconvenience. To Diana, it was a textbook example of infrastructure preparation preceding an assault. Professional operators didn't rely on coincidences. They created the conditions they needed to achieve their objectives. Diana's radio erupted with confused chatter from Hoffman's security team. The power interruption had disabled several electronic security systems, including the card readers that controlled access to sensitive areas and the digital cameras that provided remote monitoring capability. Danny Walsh's voice from the security station reflected the team's confusion. "Command, we've lost visual on floors 38 through 42. Camera system is down. Should I call maintenance?" Hoffman's response revealed his complete failure to understand the situation. "Probably just a power surge. These systems go down all the time. Walsh, use the backup monitors. Everyone else continue normal patrol patterns." Normal patrol patterns.
Diana's combat experience translated that phrase into a death sentence for anyone who followed it. The unknown assault team had just created conditions that eliminated electronic surveillance, disabled access controls, and reduced lighting to levels that favored attackers who had prepared for low-visibility operations. Hoffman's response was to continue doing exactly what they expected him to do. Diana's notebook filled with rapid observations as she tracked the assault team's final preparations. Vehicle positions shifted again, creating blocking positions that would prevent police response vehicles from approaching the building. Personnel moved from surveillance positions to assault positions, their movements now focused on speed rather than concealment. The attack was beginning, and Atlas Defense Corporation's security team was about to face a test they were completely unqualified to handle. Diana's military training had prepared her for this moment, though she had never imagined it would come while she was wearing a cleaning lady's uniform and carrying a mop bucket. Her combat experience had taught her to recognize the moment when observation ended and action began. That moment had arrived. The professionals who were about to assault Atlas Defense Corporation had planned for every contingency except one. They had no idea that the building's cleaning lady was a combat veteran with 12 years of experience in exactly the kind of warfare they were about to bring to downtown Phoenix. Diana Sullivan, Staff Sergeant, 524th Engineer Battalion, was about to remind everyone, including herself, that warriors didn't stop being warriors just because they changed uniforms. The woman who had saved soldiers' lives in Afghanistan was about to discover whether those same skills could save corporate executives in a glass tower. The battle for Atlas Defense Corporation was about to begin, and the most qualified person to fight it was someone nobody would think to ask for help.
At 1:28 a.m., Diana made the decision that would change everything. She abandoned her cleaning cart in the 37th floor conference room and moved toward the security station on the 36th floor, her military training overriding 6 months of learned invisibility. The time for quiet observation had ended. Atlas Defense Corporation was under attack by professionals, and the people responsible for protecting it were about to get everyone killed through sheer incompetence. The security station buzzed with confused activity when Diana arrived. Danny Walsh sat before a bank of monitors that displayed nothing but static and error messages, frantically pressing buttons that had no effect on the disabled surveillance system. Alex Chen paced behind him, consulting a manual that had never anticipated a coordinated assault. Tyler Brooks and Jake Morrison had returned from their thorough parking garage patrol, their confidence intact despite having missed every sign of the impending attack. Gerald Hoffman stood at the center of the chaos, issuing orders that revealed his complete failure to grasp the severity of the situation. Walsh, keep working on those cameras. Chen, call the building's maintenance supervisor. Brooks, Morrison, I want you to check the backup generators. This is probably just an electrical problem, but we need to maintain professional standards. Professional standards. Diana's combat experience translated that phrase into guaranteed disaster. While Hoffman focused on maintaining appearances, trained killers were positioning themselves to assault a building full of people who had no idea they were in mortal danger. "Excuse me," Diana said, her voice cutting through the security team's confused chatter. "You need to evacuate the building immediately and call for police backup." The reaction was immediate and dismissive. Hoffman turned toward Diana with the expression of a man whose authority had been questioned by someone he considered beneath notice. Brooks and Morrison exchanged smirks that reflected their amusement at the cleaning lady's presumption to understand security matters. Even Chen, the most reasonable member of the team, looked embarrassed by Diana's interruption. "Ma'am," Hoffman said, his tone carrying the patronizing patience reserved for children and the mentally impaired, "I appreciate your concern, but we have everything under control here. This is just a routine power fluctuation. Why don't you return to your cleaning duties and let us handle security matters?" Diana's military training had prepared her for resistance from incompetent leadership. But the stakes had never been this high in a corporate environment. She could see through the security station's windows that the assault team had moved to their final positions. Vehicle lights had been extinguished. Personnel had disappeared into approach routes that would bring them to the building's vulnerable access points. The attack would begin within minutes, and these people were debating whether to call a maintenance supervisor.
"Sir," Diana said, her voice carrying the authority she had learned to project when soldiers' lives depended on immediate compliance. "I have military experience in threat assessment. What you're seeing isn't a power problem, it's preparation for a coordinated assault. Those vehicles in the parking garage aren't random visitors. The power interruption wasn't accidental. You have professionals outside this building who are about to come in here with weapons and tactical training." The security station fell silent as Diana's words registered. For a moment, she thought her expertise might override their prejudices. Then Hoffman's face flushed red with the anger of a man whose authority had been challenged by someone he had spent months dismissing as irrelevant. "Lady," Hoffman said, his voice rising to ensure everyone in the station could hear his reassertion of control, "I don't know what kind of military experience you think you have, but I've been doing security work for 15 years. What we have here is a routine electrical problem and an overactive imagination. Now, I'm going to ask you one more time to return to your work area and leave security operations to qualified professionals." Brooke stepped forward, his physical presence intended to reinforce Hoffman's verbal dismissal. "Yeah, seriously, you're the cleaning lady, we're the security team. We've got training and equipment and protocols. You've got a mop bucket and some crazy ideas about military attacks. Maybe stick to what you know." Diana's combat experience had taught her to recognize the moment when rational argument failed and survival instincts had to take precedence. That moment had arrived. Through the security station's windows, she could see muzzle flashes in the parking garage. The assault team was neutralizing the exterior lighting to create the darkness they needed for their approach. The attack had begun, and Hoffman's qualified professionals were still debating whether anything unusual was happening.
"Those muzzle flashes you're seeing in the parking garage," Diana said, pointing toward the windows, "those aren't car backfires or electrical problems. Those are suppressed weapons eliminating security lighting. The men carrying them will be inside this building in less than 5 minutes. When they arrive, your training and equipment and protocols are going to get everyone killed unless you listen to someone who actually knows what they're talking about." Morrison laughed openly. "Muzzle flashes? Lady, those are just car headlights reflecting off the windows. You really have been watching too many action movies." Chen, who had been studying the parking garage through binoculars, lowered them with a troubled expression. "Actually, those do look like—" "Chen," Hoffman interrupted sharply, "don't let civilian panic affect your professional judgment. What we're seeing are normal nighttime activities in an urban environment. Walsh, any luck with those cameras?" Walsh looked up from his monitors with the expression of someone drowning in technical problems he didn't understand. "Still nothing, sir. The whole system seems to be down. I've never seen anything like this." "Because you've never seen a professional electronic warfare attack," Diana said, her patience finally exhausted. "They're not just jamming your cameras. They're taking control of your entire security infrastructure. Your card readers, your communication systems, your alarm protocols, everything you're depending on to protect this building is being turned against you." The radio on Walsh's desk crackled to life with a transmission that made Diana's blood run cold. "Phoenix Fire Department to Atlas Defense Security. We're receiving reports of a possible gas leak in your building. We need all personnel to evacuate immediately and meet at the designated assembly point." Diana recognized the transmission immediately as a deception operation designed to draw security personnel away from the building's defensive positions. The voice was professional, the procedures sounded official, but the timing was too convenient and the message too perfectly suited to the assault team's needs. "That's not Phoenix Fire Department," Diana said urgently. "That's the assault team, trying to get your security personnel outside where they can be controlled or eliminated. Real emergency responders don't use your internal radio frequencies." Hoffman's face showed the first crack in his confident dismissal. He looked at the radio with uncertainty, then at his team, then back at Diana with an expression that mixed confusion with resentment. "How could you possibly know that?" he demanded. "Because I spent 12 years learning how these operations work. I'm a combat veteran with expertise in explosive ordnance disposal and tactical operations. I've been trying to tell you for months that this building has security vulnerabilities, and tonight someone is exploiting every single one of them." Brooke stepped closer, his voice dripping with contempt. "Combat veteran? You're a cleaning lady. You mop floors and empty trash cans. What kind of combat experience could you possibly have?" Diana's military training had taught her that some situations could only be resolved through demonstration rather than explanation.
She moved to the weapons storage cabinet that Hoffman's team had left unlocked during their confusion, withdrew an unloaded M4 rifle that was used for training exercises, and began field stripping it with the fluid precision that came from years of combat experience. The rifle came apart in her hands with mechanical efficiency. Charging handle, bolt group, firing pin, bolt, cam pin, each component removed in the correct sequence with movements so practiced they appeared automatic. The entire disassembly took 8 seconds. The security station fell completely silent as Diana began reassembly with the same mechanical precision. Bolt and firing pin aligned, cam pin inserted, bolt carrier group locked into place, charging handle secured. The entire process took 12 seconds from start to finish. When she was done, she placed the reassembled rifle on the counter and looked directly at Hoffman. Staff Sergeant Diana Sullivan, 524 Engineer Battalion, 3 combat deployments, 12 years of service. I know what I'm talking about because I've been in situations exactly like this one. The only difference is that in Afghanistan, the people I was trying to protect listened when I told them their lives were in danger. The silence that followed was broken by the sound of breaking glass from somewhere in the building below them.
The sound of shattering glass cut through the security station like a gunshot, instantly transforming the atmosphere from skeptical dismissal to genuine alarm. Diana's military training automatically identified the source. Ground floor, northeast corner, approximately the location of the building's service entrance. The assault team had begun their breach, and Hoffman's security personnel were about to face a reality that their weekend training courses had never prepared them for. What the hell was that? Morrison's voice cracked with the first hint of real fear as he looked toward the windows facing the direction of the sound. Diana moved immediately to the weapons cabinet, her combat instincts overriding months of civilian deference. That was your building being breached by a professional assault team. We have maybe 3 minutes before they reach this floor, and they're going to be moving fast and coordinated. Your choice is to listen to me or die because you're too proud to take advice from the cleaning lady. Hoffman's authority crumbled visibly as the reality of the situation penetrated his corporate confidence. The breaking glass had been followed by the unmistakable sound of multiple sets of boots moving through the building's lower levels with tactical precision. These weren't random burglars or disgruntled employees. They were operators executing a plan that had been rehearsed and refined. "Walsh," Diana said, taking command with the natural authority that came from actual experience in life and death situations. "Get on the radio and contact Phoenix PD. Tell them we have an active armed assault in progress at Atlas Defense Corporation, Pinnacle Tower. Multiple suspects, professional tactics, immediate response required. Use the emergency frequency, not the building's internal communications." Walsh looked at Hoffman for permission, caught between his trained deference to authority and his growing recognition that Diana might be the only person in the room who understood their situation. "Do it," Hoffman said, his voice barely above a whisper. Diana turned to Chen, who had been the only member of the team to show any respect for her observations. "Chen, I need you to access the weapon storage and get every functional firearm in this building. Check the ammunition counts and make sure everything is loaded and ready. We're going to have to hold this position until police backup arrives." "How many of them are there?" Chen asked, already moving toward the weapons cabinet with the quick compliance that came from recognizing competence. Diana closed her eyes and listened to the sounds echoing through the building's ventilation system. Footsteps, radio communications in what sounded like Russian, the mechanical sounds of professional equipment being deployed. Her combat experience translated the audio information into tactical intelligence. At least 6, possibly 8. They're moving in 2 teams, one securing the lower floors and controlling access points, one advancing toward the upper levels where the classified research is located. They know this building's layout better than your security team does. Brooks and Morrison exchanged glances that mixed terror with confusion. Their tactical gear suddenly felt like costume jewelry when confronted with actual tactical situations. "What do we do?" Morrison asked, his earlier mockery replaced with desperate need for guidance. Diana's military training kicked into full command mode. 12 years of combat experience had taught her to function effectively when ordinary people froze with fear or confusion. The skills that had kept her alive in Afghanistan were about to be tested in a glass tower in downtown Phoenix. "Brooks, Morrison, you're going to secure the stairwells on this floor. They can't reach us without coming through those access points, so that's where we make our stand. But you do exactly what I tell you to do when I tell you to do it. No improvisation, no heroics, no thinking for yourselves. Your job is to follow orders from someone who actually knows how to fight. Diana moved to the security station's computer terminal and began accessing building schematics that she had memorized during her months of cleaning. Her fingers flew across the keyboard with practiced efficiency, calling up floor plans and emergency protocols that revealed Atlas Defense Corporation's defensive capabilities. "Hoffman," she said without looking up from the screen, "I need you to contact whoever has authority to activate this building's lockdown procedures. Every elevator needs to be disabled, every access card reader needs to be reset, and every door that can be sealed electronically needs to be locked immediately." Hoffman fumbled for his phone with hands that shook visibly. The man who had spent months dismissing Diana's concerns was now completely dependent on her expertise for his survival.
The building's intercom system crackled to life with a voice that made Diana's blood run cold. Professional, calm, speaking accented English with the confidence of someone executing a well-rehearsed plan. "Atlas Defense Corporation personnel, this is a security exercise. Please remain in your current locations while our team completes a facility assessment. Do not attempt to leave the building or contact outside authorities." Diana recognized the psychological operation immediately, an attempt to prevent building occupants from calling for help or evacuating while the assault team completed their objectives. The same tactic had been used against American forces in Iraq, designed to buy time and prevent resistance. "That's them," Diana said. "They're trying to keep anyone else in the building from interfering while they complete their mission, which means we're not dealing with random criminals. We're dealing with people who understand psychological operations and information warfare." Chen returned from the weapons storage with an armload of equipment that revealed Atlas Defense Corporation's actual defensive capabilities: 3 M4 rifles, 2 sidearms, and enough ammunition to sustain a prolonged engagement. More importantly, Chen's expression showed that he was beginning to understand the severity of their situation. "Diana," Chen said, using her first name for the first time in 6 months. "Who are these people? What do they want?" Diana's military experience had taught her to assess enemy motivations based on their tactics and objectives. The assault team's approach suggested specific goals rather than random violence. They're after the classified research on the 40th floor, the prototype weapon systems, the communication technology, the tactical equipment that Atlas develops for special operations forces. This isn't a robbery, it's industrial espionage with military-level execution. The sound of elevator doors opening on their floor made everyone in the security station freeze. Diana's combat instincts identified the sound immediately. The assault team had bypassed the building's security measures and was approaching their position. "Positions," Diana commanded, her voice carrying the authority that came from actual leadership under fire. "Brooks, north stairwell. Morrison, south stairwell. Chen, cover the elevator bank. Walsh, maintain radio contact with police response. Hoffman, get behind that desk and stay there." Diana moved to the security station's main entrance, the M4 rifle feeling familiar and reassuring in her hands. Muscle memory from thousands of hours of combat training took over as she checked her sight picture and confirmed her fields of fire. The woman who had been dismissed as just the cleaning lady was about to demonstrate the difference between corporate security theater and actual combat capability. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime that seemed absurdly polite given the circumstances. 4 men emerged, moving with coordinated precision that Diana recognized from her own military training. They wore tactical gear that was professional rather than showy, carried weapons that were functional rather than impressive, and demonstrated situational awareness that immediately identified Diana as the primary threat in the room. The first man through the elevator doors was tall, lean, and moved with the fluid grace that came from extensive combat experience. His eyes met Diana's across the security station, and she saw immediate recognition, not of her identity, but of her capabilities. He understood immediately that he was facing someone with military training rather than corporate security. "Staff Sergeant," he said in accented English, his voice carrying the respect that no one at Atlas Defense Corporation had ever shown her. "You should not be here." Diana's rifle remained steady, her sight picture centered on the man's chest. 12 years of combat experience had taught her to recognize the moment when talking ended and shooting began. "Neither should you," she replied, "but here we are." The moment stretched between them like a taut wire, professional soldiers recognizing each other across a divide of nationality and mission, each calculating odds and assessing capabilities with the cold precision that came from survival training. Then the wire snapped, and the battle for Atlas Defense Corporation began in earnest.
The first exchange of gunfire lasted exactly 17 seconds. Diana's military training had prepared her for the chaos of combat, but Hoffman's security team had not. Brooks froze completely when the shooting started, his expensive tactical gear useless against the paralysis of genuine fear. Morrison dropped behind cover and began firing blindly, his shots going wide and high while accomplishing nothing except wasting ammunition and revealing his position. Diana, however, fought with the cold precision that had kept her alive through 3 combat deployments. Her first shot took down the assault team leader before he could fully exit the elevator. Her second and third shots forced the remaining attackers back into cover, buying precious seconds for her makeshift defensive team to adapt to the reality of armed combat. "Chen, northwest corner," Diana shouted over the gunfire. "Suppressive fire on the elevator bank. Brooks, if you don't start shooting back right now, we're all dead." The young security guard's training finally overcame his terror. Chen moved to the position Diana had indicated and began laying down covering fire with the competence that came from actually paying attention during weapons training. His shots were measured, controlled, and effective, forcing the assault team to remain in defensive positions rather than advancing toward their objectives. The assault team leader, wounded but still functional, made a decision that revealed his own professional training. Rather than continue a frontal assault that was clearly failing, he began coordinating a tactical withdrawal while his team prepared for a more sophisticated approach. "They're pulling back," Diana announced, her voice carrying over the diminishing gunfire. "But they're not retreating. They're regrouping for a flanking maneuver. Chen, watch that north stairwell. They'll try to come around behind us." Walsh's voice crackled over the radio with information that brought both relief and new concerns. "Phoenix PD is en route. ETA 6 minutes. SWAT team is mobilizing, but they're reporting that someone is jamming emergency frequencies and GPS navigation systems." Diana's combat experience immediately understood the implications. The assault team wasn't just prepared for building security, they were prepared for police response. Electronic warfare capabilities suggested military-level resources and planning. "Walsh, tell responding officers they're dealing with professionals using military tactics and equipment. They need to treat this as a terrorist incident, not a routine break-in. And they need to know that we have friendly forces defending the 36th floor. I don't want police backup shooting the wrong people." Hoffman, who had remained hidden behind his desk throughout the firefight, finally found his voice. "Diana, how did you know? How did you see this coming?" Diana kept her rifle trained on the elevator bank while answering, her attention never wavering from potential threat vectors. "Because I spent 12 years learning to recognize these patterns. The surveillance, the reconnaissance, the infrastructure attacks, it was all textbook preparation for an assault operation. You didn't listen because you couldn't accept that someone without corporate credentials might know something you didn't." The sound of movement in the building's ventilation system made everyone freeze. Diana's military training identified the sound immediately. The assault team was using the building's infrastructure to bypass their defensive positions. "They're in the vents," Diana said. "Chen, cover that access panel above the copier. Morrison, north wall, ceiling level. They're going to try dropping down behind our positions."
The next phase of the battle tested every aspect of Diana's combat training. The assault team emerged from multiple access points simultaneously, their coordination revealing extensive rehearsal and professional execution. But Diana's defensive positioning had anticipated exactly this type of multi-directional assault. Chen's covering fire prevented the first attacker from establishing a stable shooting position. Morrison, despite his earlier panic, managed to force a second attacker back into the ventilation system with well-placed shots. Diana herself engaged the third attacker in a brief but intense exchange that ended with the enemy fighter retreating with obvious wounds. The building's fire alarm system suddenly activated, adding chaos to an already complex situation. Diana recognized this as another tactical element. The assault team was using every available resource to create confusion and prevent effective defensive coordination. "Ignore the alarms," Diana shouted over the electronic wailing. "It's a distraction technique. Stay focused on your fields of fire." Walsh's radio crackled with an update that changed everything. "Phoenix PD has established a perimeter around the building. SWAT is preparing for entry, but they're receiving conflicting information about the situation inside." Diana understood immediately that the assault team was conducting information warfare alongside their physical assault, feeding false intelligence to police responders to delay or misdirect their intervention. "Walsh, patch me through to the SWAT commander directly. I need to give them accurate tactical intelligence." When the connection was established, Diana's voice carried the authority of someone with genuine expertise. "SWAT Commander, this is Staff Sergeant Diana Sullivan, combat veteran currently defending the 36th floor. You're dealing with at least 6 hostiles using military tactics and equipment. They have electronic warfare capabilities and are feeding you false information. The building's security system is compromised. You need to treat this as a counterterrorism operation." The SWAT commander's response revealed both professional competence and healthy skepticism. "Ma'am, we need to verify your identity and authority before accepting tactical guidance." "Commander, I'm the cleaning lady who assembled an M4 rifle in 12 seconds and has been holding a defensive position against professional assault troops for the past 15 minutes while your corporately trained security team figured out which end of their weapons the bullets come from. My authority comes from being the only person in this building who actually knows what they're talking about." A long pause, then, "Understood, Sergeant. What's your tactical assessment?" Diana's briefing was concise and professional. 6 to 8 hostiles, military trained. Objective appears to be classified research on floors 39 through 42. They've prepared for police response with electronic countermeasures and information warfare. Building security systems are compromised. I can maintain this defensive position until you arrive, but you need to know they're going to have contingency plans for dealing with SWAT response. The assault team's next move confirmed Diana's assessment. Instead of continuing their assault on the security station, they abandoned their attack and moved toward their primary objective, the classified research areas that had been their target from the beginning. "They're pulling back to complete their mission," Diana announced. "Chen, Morrison, maintain defensive positions here. Brooks, you're with me. We're going after them." Hoffman's voice carried desperation. "Diana, shouldn't we wait for police backup?" Diana's response was immediate. "If they reach those research labs and complete their data extraction, it won't matter if we survive. The weapons technology they're after could be used against American soldiers for the next 20 years. We stop them here, or people die because we were too careful." Diana moved toward the stairwell with Brooks following reluctantly behind her, his respect for her expertise now complete despite his terror of the situation they were entering. The woman who had been mocked as just the cleaning lady was about to pursue professional soldiers through a building she knew better than they did, armed with skills they hadn't expected to encounter, fighting for objectives they hadn't planned to defend. The assault team had prepared for everything except facing a combat veteran who understood their tactics, anticipated their strategies, and possessed the training and determination to stop them, regardless of the personal cost. The hunt for the classified research data was about to become the hunt for the hunters themselves. Diana moved through the upper floors of Atlas Defense Corporation with the silent efficiency that had kept her alive in Afghanistan. Brooks followed behind her, his earlier bravado replaced by desperate reliance on someone who actually knew how to fight. The building that Diana had cleaned for 6 months had become a 3-dimensional battlefield where her intimate knowledge of every corridor, every room, and every potential ambush point gave her a crucial tactical advantage. The assault team had made their first critical error by underestimating their opposition. Their second error was attempting to complete their mission in a building defended by someone who understood both their objectives and their methods better than they understood hers. Diana's radio crackled with updates from Walsh in the security station.
Phoenix PD has established full perimeter control. SWAT teams are entering through multiple access points. But they're reporting that the building's electronic systems are completely compromised. Elevators, cameras, access controls, everything's been turned against them. Copy that, Walsh, Diana responded, her voice barely above a whisper as she approached the stairwell leading to the 39th floor. Tell SWAT commander that the hostiles are moving toward the classified research areas. I'm in pursuit with one security team member. We'll try to delay them until backup arrives. Brooks's voice cracked with tension. Diana, shouldn't we wait for SWAT? Those guys are professionals. We're just... Brooks, Diana interrupted, her military authority cutting through his fear. Right now, you're following the only person in this building who has successfully engaged these professionals and lived to talk about it. Stay behind me, do exactly what I tell you, and try not to get yourself killed. The 39th floor revealed the assault team's tactical sophistication. They had moved through the area with professional efficiency, neutralizing security measures, and accessing restricted areas with equipment that suggested military-level resources. But they had also left signs that Diana's combat training could read like a roadmap. Scuff marks on the floor that revealed their movement patterns, equipment staging that indicated their next objectives, and timing that suggested they were operating under pressure. They're running behind schedule, Diana observed, studying the evidence of the assault team's passage. The resistance they encountered on 36 disrupted their timeline. They're going to start making mistakes. Diana's assessment proved accurate when she heard voices from the 40th floor. The assault team was arguing about something in what she recognized as Russian. Her military experience had included language training that allowed her to understand fragments of their conversation. They were debating whether to continue with their data extraction mission or abort and escape before SWAT reached their position. Brooks, they're right above us, Diana whispered. I need you to stay here and cover the stairwell. If anyone comes down who isn't me or SWAT, you shoot them. Can you handle that? Brooks's nod was more determined than confident, but Diana recognized the resolve that came from understanding the stakes. The man who had mocked her military experience 6 hours earlier was now completely dependent on her expertise for his survival. Diana moved to the 40th floor alone, her M4 rifle ready and her combat instincts at full alert. The classified research laboratories that housed Atlas Defense Corporation's most sensitive projects had been transformed into a battlefield where corporate espionage met military tactics. The assault team had established a defensive position around the main server room, their focus split between extracting classified data and preparing for the police response they knew was coming. Diana counted 3 hostile positions, with at least one additional team member working on the computer systems that contained the weapons technology intelligence they had come to steal. Diana's military training had prepared her for exactly this type of situation, outnumbered, operating alone, facing professionals in a confined space. The difference was that this time she was fighting on ground she knew intimately rather than hostile territory she was seeing for the first time. Her first shot took out the assault team member guarding the server room entrance. Her second shot forced the computer specialist to abandon his data extraction and take cover. Her third shot eliminated the covering fire that had been protecting their withdrawal route.
The remaining assault team members recognized immediately that they were facing someone with genuine combat expertise. Their leader, wounded from the earlier engagement but still functional, made the tactical decision that revealed his professional training. He abandoned the mission rather than risk his entire team for intelligence that was no longer worth the cost. "Sergeant," he called out in accented English, using the respectful tone that one professional soldier reserves for another. "We withdraw. No further engagement necessary." Diana's response came from behind cover that gave her complete control over the room's exit routes. "Negative. You drop your weapons and surrender to responding officers, or I finish what you started in the security station." The tactical standoff that followed lasted exactly 97 seconds. Diana had learned to count time automatically during combat situations. The assault team leader was calculating odds and escape routes, while Diana maintained fire superiority from a position that prevented their withdrawal. Both sides understood that the arrival of SWAT backup would end the engagement decisively in Diana's favor. The sound of tactical boots in the stairwell announced the arrival of Phoenix Police SWAT, their professional competence immediately evident in their coordinated movement and communication discipline. Diana identified herself clearly to prevent friendly fire incidents, then provided rapid tactical intelligence that allowed the SWAT team to secure the area with minimal additional violence. "Sergeant Sullivan," the SWAT commander said as his team processed the scene, "that was exceptional work. Where did you acquire counter-assault training?" 12 years in combat engineering, sir. 3 deployments, extensive experience with explosive ordnance disposal and small unit tactics. I learned to recognize these patterns because my life depended on it." The aftermath revealed the full scope of what Diana had prevented. The assault team had been attempting to steal classified weapons technology that would have compromised American military operations for decades. Their level of preparation and professional execution suggested state-sponsored espionage rather than criminal activity. Gerald Hoffman arrived on the 40th floor as SWAT finished securing the area, his face showing the complete collapse of everything he had believed about security, authority, and competence. The man who had spent months dismissing Diana's expertise was now confronted with undeniable evidence of his own inadequacy. "Diana," Hoffman said, his voice barely audible, "I need to apologize. I was wrong about everything. Your military experience, your security assessments, your warnings about vulnerabilities, you were right about all of it." Diana's response reflected the professionalism she had learned during 12 years of military service. "Sir, the important thing is that we prevented a major security breach and no one was killed. The apologies can wait until after we figure out how to prevent this from happening again." But Diana's military training had also taught her to conduct thorough after-action assessments. The assault on Atlas Defense Corporation had revealed systematic failures that went far beyond Hoffman's personal incompetence. "Commander," Diana said to the SWAT leader, "this building's security vulnerabilities are extensive. The assault team had detailed intelligence about our procedures, our equipment, and our personnel. This was an inside operation, or they had access to inside information." The investigation that followed would reveal the truth behind the assault team's sophisticated preparation. Atlas Defense Corporation's security had been compromised not by brilliant espionage, but by fundamental failures in personnel screening, information security, and threat assessment. More importantly, the investigation would reveal that Diana's months of observations and warnings had been systematically ignored not because they were wrong, but because acknowledging their accuracy would have required admitting that a disabled veteran working as a cleaning lady understood security better than the people being paid to provide it. The woman who had been dismissed as just the cleaning lady had saved lives, prevented a major intelligence breach, and exposed security failures that could have compromised national defense operations. Her 12-second rifle assembly had been impressive, but her tactical leadership under fire had been genuinely exceptional. Gerald Hoffman's career in corporate security was effectively over, but Diana Sullivan's career in protecting the things that mattered was just beginning a new chapter. The question was whether Atlas Defense Corporation and the broader defense industry would learn from this incident or simply find new ways to ignore expertise that didn't fit their preconceptions. The battle for Atlas Defense Corporation was over, but the larger war between competence and credentials was just getting started.
3 weeks after the assault on Atlas Defense Corporation, Diana Sullivan sat in the executive conference room on the 37th floor, the same room she had been cleaning when she first noticed the surveillance vehicles that had started everything. But now she sat at the polished mahogany table as Atlas Defense Corporation's newly appointed Director of Security Operations, facing a panel of corporate executives, Pentagon officials, and defense industry leaders who had come to understand how close they had come to catastrophic failure. The transformation had been swift and comprehensive. Within 48 hours of the incident, Gerald Hoffman had submitted his resignation, citing personal reasons that everyone understood meant professional humiliation. Brooks, Morrison, and Walsh had been reassigned to positions that better matched their actual capabilities. Chen, who had shown genuine competence during the crisis, had been promoted to Deputy Security Director under Diana's supervision. But the changes went far beyond personnel. The assault on Atlas Defense had exposed systemic vulnerabilities that threatened not just one company, but the entire defense contracting industry's approach to security. "Miss Sullivan," said Rebecca Winters, Atlas Defense's chief operating officer, "your after-action report has raised some disturbing questions about how we evaluate security competence throughout the defense industry." Diana's report had been thorough, professional, and devastating in its assessment of corporate security practices.
She had documented not just the tactical failures that had nearly resulted in a major intelligence breach, but the institutional blindness that had made those failures inevitable. "Ma'am," Diana replied, "the problem isn't just that we hired unqualified people for security positions. The problem is that we systematically excluded qualified people because we confused credentials with capability. The assault team succeeded as far as they did because our security approach was designed for appearance rather than effectiveness." The Pentagon representative, Colonel James Mitchell, leaned forward with obvious interest. "Miss Sullivan, you're suggesting that this incident represents broader problems within defense industry security." Diana's response drew from 12 years of military experience and 6 months of observing security from the inside. "Sir, I'm suggesting that we've created a system where someone with weekend training courses and no real-world experience can be placed in charge of protecting classified military technology, while someone with 12 years of combat experience gets dismissed as just the cleaning lady because she doesn't have the right corporate background." The room fell silent as the implications of Diana's assessment settled over the assembled officials. The woman who had been invisible to them for months was now forcing them to confront uncomfortable truths about their own judgment and priorities. Stephen Webb, Atlas Defense's Human Resources Director, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Diana, I need to apologize for our failure to properly evaluate your qualifications during the hiring process. Your military background should have been recognized as a valuable asset." "Mr. Webb, my military background was in my employment file. The problem wasn't lack of information, it was institutional bias against people who didn't fit your preconceptions about what security expertise looks like." The investigation that had followed the assault had revealed the full extent of those biases. Diana's personnel file contained documentation of her combat experience, her security clearance history, and her technical expertise. But the hiring managers had focused on her disability rating and her current job status rather than her actual qualifications. More disturbing, the investigation had revealed that Diana wasn't the only qualified candidate who had been overlooked. Atlas Defense Corporation's employment records showed dozens of veterans with relevant experience who had been passed over for security positions in favor of candidates with impressive-looking but ultimately meaningless credentials. Colonel Mitchell consulted his notes before continuing. "Miss Sullivan, the Pentagon is considering new requirements for security personnel at defense contractors. Based on your recommendations, we're looking at mandatory combat experience for senior security positions and veteran preference policies that would prioritize real-world expertise over academic credentials." Diana nodded approvingly. "Sir, that would be a significant improvement. But the bigger issue is creating evaluation systems that can recognize expertise regardless of where it comes from. The assault team that attacked us succeeded because they understood that our security approach was based on procedures rather than principles."
The corporate executives exchanged glances that revealed their discomfort with Diana's direct criticism of their practices. But her successful defense of their building had earned her credibility that couldn't be dismissed or ignored. Catherine Walsh, the facility director who had overseen Diana's hiring as a cleaning lady, spoke with obvious embarrassment. "Diana, I've reviewed our security protocols, and you're absolutely right about the fundamental flaws in our approach. We were focused on compliance rather than protection, process rather than results." Diana's response reflected the professionalism she had learned during her military career. "Ma'am, the important thing is that we learn from this incident and implement changes that will prevent similar failures. The people who died in Afghanistan and Iraq can't benefit from improved security protocols, but the people working in defense facilities today still can." The mention of combat casualties brought gravity to a discussion that had been focused on corporate embarrassment. Diana's perspective came from a world where security failures meant body bags rather than incident reports. Alex Chen, now sitting beside Diana as her deputy, contributed his own assessment.
Directors, I want to emphasize that Diana identified every vulnerability that the assault team exploited. Her warnings were specific, accurate, and timely. The failure wasn't in our intelligence. It was in our willingness to listen to intelligence that came from an unexpected source. The meeting continued for 3 hours, covering everything from personnel policies to equipment procurement to threat assessment procedures. But the central theme remained constant. Atlas Defense Corporation and the broader defense industry needed to fundamentally change how they identified and utilized security expertise. The changes that emerged from Diana's recommendations were comprehensive and industry-wide. Within 6 months, 3 major defense contractors had implemented veteran preference policies for security positions. The Pentagon had issued new guidelines requiring practical experience for personnel responsible for protecting classified facilities. Most importantly, corporate hiring practices had been reformed to prevent qualified candidates from being excluded due to disability status or non-traditional backgrounds. But perhaps the most significant change was cultural rather than procedural. Diana's story had become known throughout the defense industry, serving as a powerful reminder that expertise could come from unexpected sources and that dismissing people based on assumptions could have catastrophic consequences. Richard Dunham, Atlas Defense Corporation's CEO, concluded the meeting with an announcement that surprised everyone present. Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to know that Ms. Sullivan has been offered positions with 4 other defense contractors and 3 federal agencies. She has chosen to remain with Atlas Defense Corporation, but only on the condition that we implement her complete security reform package and commit to identifying and developing security talent regardless of where we find it. Diana's decision to remain with Atlas hadn't been motivated by corporate loyalty or financial incentives. She had stayed because the company had given her the authority to create systematic changes that would benefit the entire industry. Sir, my conditions also include establishing a mentorship program for veterans transitioning to civilian security careers and creating evaluation procedures that measure actual capability rather than perceived credentials. We need to make sure this kind of institutional blindness never puts American security at risk again. As the meeting concluded, Diana reflected on the transformation that had occurred in just 3 weeks. The woman who had been dismissed as just the cleaning lady was now responsible for security at one of America's most important defense facilities. More significantly, her experience had become a catalyst for industry-wide reforms that would benefit thousands of qualified veterans who had been overlooked by corporate hiring practices. But Diana also understood that individual success wasn't enough. Real change required sustained effort to ensure that competence was recognized and valued regardless of its source, and that the people responsible for protecting America's military technology were actually qualified to do the job. The battle for Atlas Defense Corporation had been won, but the war for rational security policies was ongoing. Diana had proven that a cleaning lady could outfight professional soldiers and outthink corporate executives. But more importantly, she had proven that America's defense infrastructure was only as strong as its willingness to recognize and utilize all available talent. The woman who had assembled an M4 rifle in 12 seconds had disassembled assumptions about expertise, credentials, and competence that would take years to fully rebuild. 2 years after the assault on Atlas Defense Corporation, Diana Sullivan stood before a packed auditorium at the National Defense University in Washington, D.C., delivering the keynote address at the annual Military to Civilian Security Transition Conference. At 44, she had become one of the most respected voices in the defense industry. But her message remained focused on the people who were still being overlooked by systems that prioritized appearance over ability. When I was working as a cleaning lady, Diana began, her voice carrying easily through the large hall, corporate executives would walk past me every day without seeing me. They saw someone who emptied their wastebaskets and vacuumed their offices, not someone who had spent 12 years protecting American soldiers from the same kind of threats that were targeting their building. The audience consisted of defense industry leaders, Pentagon officials, veteran services coordinators, and, most importantly, hundreds of military veterans who were struggling to translate their combat experience into civilian careers. Diana's story had become legendary in veteran communities, but her focus remained on practical solutions rather than personal recognition. The night I assembled that M4 rifle in 12 seconds wasn't about proving how fast I could field strip a weapon. It was about proving that expertise doesn't disappear when you change uniforms, and that dismissing people based on their current circumstances can cost lives. Behind her, a presentation screen displayed statistics that told the story of systemic change. Since the Atlas defense incident, veteran unemployment in security-related fields had dropped by 37%. Defense contractor security positions filled by combat veterans had increased by 52%. Most significantly, security incidents at major defense facilities had decreased by 41% as qualified personnel replaced credential-focused hiring. The transformation hadn't been limited to Atlas Defense Corporation. Diana's recommendations had been adopted throughout the defense industry, creating new pathways for veterans whose expertise had been ignored by corporate hiring practices. But perhaps more importantly, her experience had sparked broader conversations about how American institutions recognized and utilized talent. 3 months ago, Diana said, clicking to the next slide, I received a call from a woman named Sarah Martinez. Staff Sergeant Martinez had served 8 years as a military police officer, including 2 deployments to Iraq, where she specialized in convoy security and threat assessment. After leaving the Army, she spent 14 months working at a department store because defense contractors told her she didn't have the right quoral fit for security positions. The audience stirred with recognition. Sarah Martinez's story had become almost as well known as Diana's, but for different reasons. Today, Staff Sergeant Martinez is the security director at Northrop Aerospace, responsible for protecting some of our nation's most sensitive aircraft development programs. She was hired not despite her military experience, but because of it. More importantly, she was hired by people who had learned to recognize competence regardless of where they found it. Diana's presentation included dozens of similar success stories, veterans who had been transformed from overlooked candidates to essential security personnel through reformed hiring practices that valued capability over credentials. But she also highlighted the ongoing challenges that prevented many qualified veterans from finding positions that matched their expertise. The changes we've made in the defense industry represent progress, but they're not enough. We still have thousands of combat veterans working jobs that don't utilize their training because civilian employers can't see past their disability ratings, their educational backgrounds, or their current circumstances. Alex Chen, now Diana's deputy and a recognized expert in security operations, had accompanied her to Washington. After the conference, he reflected on the transformation that had occurred not just in their industry, but in his own understanding of leadership and competence. Diana, Chen said as they walked through the Pentagon's corridors, I keep thinking about that night when you tried to warn us about the surveillance vehicles. I was so focused on following proper procedures that I couldn't see what was right in front of me. Diana's response reflected the leadership philosophy she had developed during her military career. Chen, the important thing isn't that you missed it initially. The important thing is that you learn to recognize expertise when you see it, and that you've helped create systems that prevent other people from making the same mistakes.
The long-term impact of Diana's actions extended far beyond individual career success stories. The reforms triggered by the Atlas defense incident had created new standards for security personnel throughout the defense industry. But they had also influenced civilian law enforcement, corporate security, and federal agencies responsible for protecting critical infrastructure. The Department of Homeland Security had implemented new guidelines requiring practical experience for personnel responsible for critical facility protection. The FBI had created fast-track hiring programs for veterans with relevant combat experience. Most significantly, corporate America had begun to recognize that military experience represented valuable training rather than potential liability.
But Diana remained focused on the veterans who were still struggling to find recognition for their capabilities. Her current role as Director of Veterans Integration at the Department of Defense allowed her to address systemic barriers that prevented qualified military personnel from transitioning successfully to civilian careers. The biggest lesson from the Atlas defense incident, Diana said during her closing remarks at the conference, wasn't about security procedures or threat assessment. It was about the cost of institutional blindness to talent and expertise that doesn't fit our preconceptions. The audience included Richard Dunham, now retired from Atlas Defense Corporation, but serving on multiple boards focused on veteran employment issues. His introduction of Diana had included a frank assessment of the corporate culture that had nearly led to catastrophe. 2 years ago, our company almost suffered a major security breach because we were too arrogant to listen to someone whose expertise came from combat experience rather than corporate credentials, Dunham had said. Diana Sullivan didn't just save our classified research, she saved us from our own stupidity. After the conference, Diana received dozens of messages from veterans who were still struggling to find recognition for their capabilities. Each message reinforced her commitment to ensuring that military experience was recognized and valued in civilian contexts. One message from a former Navy SEAL working as a retail security guard captured the ongoing challenges. "Ma'am, I've been trying for 2 years to get hired by companies that need exactly the kind of expertise I gained during 8 years of special operations. They keep telling me I don't have the right background for corporate security. I know you understand what that feels like." Diana's response was immediate and practical. "Send me your resume and contact information. We have positions available for people with your qualifications, and we have companies that have learned the difference between credentials and capability." The veteran employment network that had grown from Diana's experience now included hundreds of defense contractors, federal agencies, and civilian corporations that actively sought military expertise. But more importantly, it had created cultural changes that made expertise more valuable than appearances. Gerald Hoffman's career had ended with the Atlas defense incident, but his fate had become a cautionary tale throughout the defense industry. Corporate executives now understood that hiring unqualified personnel for security positions represented not just operational risk, but career risk for the leaders who made such decisions. Diana's final slide showed a photograph that had become iconic in veteran communities. Herself in combat gear during her deployment to Afghanistan, standing beside the same M4 rifle she had assembled in 12 seconds on the night that changed everything. "This weapon helped me protect American soldiers in one of the most dangerous places in the world," Diana said. 2 years ago, corporate executives thought I wasn't qualified to protect their filing cabinets. The difference wasn't in my capabilities, it was in their ability to recognize what those capabilities meant. As the conference concluded, Diana reflected on the journey that had brought her from cleaning offices to reforming an entire industry. The woman who had been dismissed as just the cleaning lady had become a symbol of overlooked expertise and wasted potential throughout American institutions. But perhaps most importantly, she had proven that individual courage and competence could create systemic changes that benefited thousands of people who had been similarly overlooked. The 12 seconds it had taken her to assemble that rifle had dismantled decades of assumptions about who possessed expertise and who deserved recognition. The battle for Atlas Defense Corporation had lasted one night, but the war for rational recognition of military expertise was ongoing. Diana Sullivan had won more than a single engagement. She had changed how America thought about the relationship between service, sacrifice, and civilian success. The woman who had saved a building had helped save a generation of veterans from institutional blindness that had wasted their training and ignored their capabilities. Her legacy wasn't just personal vindication, it was systematic change that would benefit American security for decades to come. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.